How to world build in fantasy fiction. I wanted to talk today about how I've gone about creating a world that I've based my blog and my book writing on, the Chronicles of Romithia. I created this fictional world, Romithia, and I've slowly added more detail over the years to build it into a really strong, functional world with a really clear history. First of all, I think it's important to say how I didn't do that. So, I've heard that some people will say that they need to create a world to write the story in, and that's definitely not how I did it, and it's not a way that I can think about really. So, I've done world building as and when the story has come to me. So, when I've needed to justify something or needed to put something in a particular place, I've made it up essentially as I've gone along, as I think a lot of writers have done as well. So let me give you an example. So the first book that I wrote, it's the first in a series called Gongor's Prophecy. It actually starts out in a giant open prison, and the main character is born in that prison. And so what I needed to think about and be able to convey to the reader was how this prison ended up as it was, who built it, who is there, and why they're there. And as the main character is based there, it's what's she doing there, what's her perspective there, how much she knows about the rest of the world outside the prison. If there are people outside that prison, how is it that they evaded the capture to then be in that prison, and who built the prison and why, what was the reasoning behind that. And when I started asking myself these questions, I was able to flesh out the world. It started out with the prison and a few other details in the world that I can't go into at the moment for fear of spoiling things. And I added more detail as I went on and added more characters and more backstory. And writing Gongor's Prophecy is actually what got me to write the book that I intend to publish first, Traitor's Eye. And so that was actually born out of one big chapter in Gongor's Prophecy. And it's a way that I do things. I think I write something, and then when it's written down, I think, well, this would be a really good story to tell to understand how we got there. And so, having written Gongor's Prophecy, I then took that chapter and fleshed it out further and wrote it into what became Traitor's Eye, which is a prelude to Gongor's Prophecy. And taking one chapter and turning it into a book requires a whole lot more detail in terms of backstory and actually building backstory on backstory, because I've just finished a piece of writing called The Giant Dynasty, which was basically born out of Traitor's Eye. And one of the really beneficial things, I think, of world building is it's not something where, as I described it, you just say, right, here's my story and this happened, and now how do I build that out into its own story? It can actually be a two-way system. So when I wrote Traitor's Eye, there were some things in that I later decided, actually, now that I've fleshed this out, this is more interesting, or this makes more sense to then put back into Gongor's Prophecy. And so I did a lot of work kind of rewriting Gongor's Prophecy, having written it, adding in the new elements that I'd created from writing the prelude. And with the Giant Dynasty, actually, it's something that I was able to conceive, having written the Traitor's Eye and saying, well, this can actually be fleshed out more. That I haven't done so much. It hasn't affected Traitor's Eye retroactively really as much. In terms of the retroactive benefits of writing something, so if I take Traitor's Eye, so I'm going to talk a little bit here with some mini spoilers, but it won't ruin anything really in terms of the stories. So we have the protagonist, Kilorn, and he needs to go to a northern territory called Vengor. So the first draft that I'd written, he meets a rival of his, Yonmir, who in a conversation with him provokes him, and it's kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back in everything that he's experienced. And he decides to go to the Northern Territory, Vengor, to seek out mystery power that he thinks can change his destiny. And the way that I'd written it initially was that he had this meeting with Gongor, and he goes back and he talks with his wife, and then he says, I want to go to this northern place which I've heard about, which I think can be the key to my destiny, basically. So when I think about that now and I reflect on it, I knew I needed to get Kilorn to the north, but the way that this had been structured was really very weak. So he's provoked by a rival, and then he thinks about something completely unrelated that never came up before, that he was never interested in before until this conversation, to then decide to go there. And so while I kept that in place and I tried to convince myself that it worked, I started writing a timeline to really flesh out some of the history of the world that I built. And then I came up with this idea of the giant dynasty. And then through that, I really created the story, the perfect backstory that would allow Kilorn to go to the north. And it seemed natural and it seemed justified. Before he meets Yonmir in the latest draft, he actually reads a book which talks about giants in the giant dynasty, the first ruler, and he reads about his downfall. And that is the catalyst, the trigger that makes him want to take the journey up north. Now, I've maintained the structure of the story the same, that the meeting with Yonmir is the straw that breaks the camel's back. But now we have a lot more legitimate backstory for Kilorn to decide to go to the north. It's not just on a whim, which really doesn't work in fantasy fiction. If you'd like to know more about this, I've actually published The Giant Dynasty. It's supposed to be a prelude to the prelude of Traitor's Eye. It's not necessary reading for Traitor's Eye for whenever it comes out, but it will give you kind of an idea of the backstory and if you like the world that I've written. So you can check out the link below to subscribe to my mailing list, and as a treat you will get the ebook, The Giant Dynasty, for free. So check that out and sign up, and you can get that in your inbox straight after. And this timeline where I fleshed things out and I wrote basically just notes that weren't even really a story, just saying this happened in this year and this person decided to do this and this had this consequence. It really got my kind of creative juices flowing. And so not only was it able to help me justify the beginnings of the Traitor's Eye and really make that more legitimate, but it was able to give birth to a whole story in itself, in the Giant Dynasty. And so I think that is an incredible way to basically, once you have the bare bones of a story, even if it's not particularly justified, as I said, with the Traitor's Eye, getting Kilorn to the north, it really wasn't. And one day I may share some of that first draft with people on my mailing list to see how I'd written it, and then when Traitor's Eye comes out, you'll see how much more improved it was. And so I think world building can be a really fantastic thing just for the sake of it, in terms of having a nice world. Once you've got a story to kind of wrap your world around the story, that's how I do it rather than the other way around. But also it creates a richness in which you can tap from to bulk out your story even further. And as I've done, just build out more and more. So from Gongor's prophecy, I was able to take the backstory of that to build out the Traitor's Eye. And from that, I was able to, flesh things out in my timeline and create the Giant Dynasty. And there are even more stories that I could write from that timeline, which I may do at one point. You'll have to stay tuned to find out whether I do, and also be able to kind of to justify and to ground things that happen in your novel with historical insight or historical backstory that feels legitimate. If you're interested in finding out more about my writing journey, whether it's world building, whether it's using other tools like AI and how to use that, or whether you're interested in elements of the world that I can later explain. If you subscribe to my channel, and if you like this video, please click like, click subscribe, click the bell icon so you don't miss a future video. And yeah, let's keep on going on this journey. I'm happy to share it and I hope you're enjoying it. Thanks very much.